yourself Canadian. We pride ourselves on being one of the most free nations in the entire world, and this amendment to the criminal code is just one more step to tell the world that as Canada, we will not tolerate freedoms being taken from other people, and that we will uphold the values and virtues that Canada was built on to really live in the most free nation in the world. And so this is a very notorious day, it's a historic day, and we're very excited that this bill is going to amend the criminal code. Here in Canada, our organization is based in Toronto, so that's where a lot of our focus is spent, and we work very closely with Mrs. Smith's office further to help bills like Bill C-310 get passed in the National Action Plan, which recently has just been announced with the federal government that is going to be implemented. And one of the major aspects for Canada is with the exploitation and expanding this definition. The average age of entry into our own country is 12 to 16 years old, 12 to 14 years old, where girls are being victimized and they're being exploited. And this is going to allow us to be able to protect our girls and the children of Canada better. And I speak to many different schools across the GTA. And when I'm speaking, the average age I'm talking to is 13 years old. And all of those girls would already be trafficked, as that's the average age in our nation. So this bill is detrimental to their safety and to being able to have the authority to prosecute and to protect our girls in our country. So I just want to thank the government, thank Mrs. Smith again for this bill, and we are very proud to be here today to say that we are helping to amend the criminal code again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. The floor is now open to questions, and we begin with Jessica Murphy of Sun Media.
I guess for you, Ms. Smith, or whoever can answer, do we have an idea of how many prosecutions may come out of these changes?
Well, you know, a few years ago we never had any. And there's 56, I believe, before the courts right now. There's a lot of numbers that have rolled around. And the reason why we, you know, I don't believe any of them. What I do believe and do know that it is second only to the drug trade in profit in this country for the perpetrators. We will now, with the National Action Plan, have an opportunity to actually get those secure numbers, because, you know, you just can't throw them out of the air. Some people say 15,000, some people say other numbers, and, you know, I don't think we have the tight numbers. So the National Action Plan is what is so great to be able to quantify that.
Do we have an idea of the extent of Canadians doing this sort of, committing these crimes overseas?
You know, I have to tell you, I'm a math teacher by trade. I never intended to get into this. And I started working with the victims because my own son was in the ICE unit, and he rescued a lot of victims. And I have to tell you, I was absolutely blown away about the numbers of people that I knew were going abroad to exploit children, set up brothels, set up what they call orphanages when they're not really orphanages. And right here in Canada, like 2 weeks ago, I had 2 traffic girls come to see me in my office right here in Canada. Mrs. Emerson, as you know, a year ago, you know, she was convicted here in our nation's capital of trafficking some young girls. It's happening every day on our streets, and it's been under the public radar screen for a very long time. What has happened with Bill 268 and now Bill C-310 is brought it up to the public radar screen. And we're beginning to understand that this is a different kind of crime. It's not a crime where the bad guy comes with a gun and shoots up the town, that kind of thing. What it is a very manipulative, coercive kind of crime, where the perpetrator actually targets his market, which is the young girls basically, and they become friends. And they give the kids anything that they want, whether it's friendship, whether a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship evolves, whatever it is. But the purpose is to get that victim away from their social networks. It could be their families, their schools, their communities, and also to take their identification. So whether it's homegrown human traffic victims or whether it's victims from abroad, it all adds up the same way. There's even websites that show how to groom a girl for human trafficking. So it's a technique that the perpetrators have got very well. So they get the girl away, and then the whole matter changes then. the girl is raped, they're shot up with drugs, and their lives disappear before them. The same as a Manny Pangy's victim, a victim that I've worked with for years. And, you know, these are not people that think they're ever going to get into this. And it's not only people from abroad, it's people next door that's happening to. And a lot of the young girls I've spoken to, they don't want their parents to ever know. They don't want. I had a young girl a couple of weeks ago. She was trafficked down to California. She doesn't want her parents to know. For all her parents knows, she was just, you know, sort of a runaway that went to see the world for a while. This is a crime that's coming out and that we're going to hear about more and more as more and more convictions come. So with those numbers and with how the perpetrators work, that's basically how it happens. It's a dark spot that has to be obliterated from our country and abroad. People shouldn't be bought and sold in this century or any century.
Take it away.
In terms, this is your second private member's bill.
Yeah.
To deal with human trafficking, closing, you know, in a sense, a couple of loopholes in the criminal code. Are there more loopholes that you want closed?
You know, there are. You know, as we get into it and more convictions come up, those loopholes present themselves. The very important aspect of this is the National Action Plan that just came out. And with the National Action Plan, for the first time, you not only have the support and the training for police officers, but you also have the support for the victims who are trafficked. That has been a huge loophole. And as this National Action Plan is 2 weeks old, and as this evolves, we'll find more loopholes. There are others, which, you know, myriad of them. If you had a couple of hours, I could sit down and talk to you about them, but basically we've got the framework now here in this country that's going to sew up a lot of the holes that were there glaringly. We don't have the glaring holes anymore. We have the little bits and pieces that we have to sew up now. But, you know, I can say one of the biggest holes is the awareness thing that the Canadian public themselves has to take on. And, you know, schools need to teach their kids, just like they did with smoking programs or any other program, that you know, the Don't Talk to Strangers program, that was something that they did in the younger grades. Now they need to talk about human traffickers and how human traffickers operate, so the kids in the upper grades know, or the young people in the upper grades know how these perpetrators work. So I think that's still a gapping hole, the awareness thing, and we need to work on that.
And I suppose just one more question. Or just a clarification. Essentially, from what I understand, before, I mean, this just got royal assent today, but or will later today, but before that, as a Canadian, you could technically go overseas and commit a crime within sort of the human trafficking arena, come here and you'd be...
We have sex tourism laws that address some of that, but what we need to do is enhance some of the laws that we already have. Bill C-310, we had the human trafficking law. What we didn't have is the extraterritorial piece of it, where Canadian citizens or residents will be accountable in other countries as well as being accountable in Canada. Also, the increased definition of human trafficking. Because in a court of law, what happened before is that the lawyer had to prove that the victim was afraid right on the onset. This is such a clandestine, manipulative crime that often the victims initially aren't afraid. They think they're going with their friends. And so that was a loophole that was sewed up in Bill C-310. And it was a very important one because that will allow a lot more convictions to occur.
So essentially it makes it easier to convict
It
people
does.
under this.
Absolutely. And they need to get the message that our young people are not for sale here in our country.
We have another question over here.
Yeah.
I have two questions. One of them, there was just a shocking case in the Ottawa area about trafficking involving young teenage girls. Do you have anything to say about that? And then the second question is about what kinds of initiatives might you be making to change the prostitution laws in Canada?
Yes, I do have something to say about that. I read it and I said, finally, something like this has come out in the public. this kind of thing is happening all over our country. I don't think the whole story is out. In my mind, there's nothing in my mind that makes me believe that these kids did it on their own. There's someone behind the scenes. And usually what happens is perpetrators have a narc in the school. They look at the vulnerable population, they get them to be part of the group, and then once they get them away, they force them into the kind of activities that you read about in the paper. This is not an isolated case. It's just the first case that's come out in the paper. But you see, the perpetrators coach these people very well. And they say, you know, don't talk to the police. Don't tell them who I am. You'll get beaten up. You'll get raped. They threaten them. Sometimes they threaten their siblings, just like Amani Nekpangi did to his victim. So that kind of thing is just starting to come out now. I have known so many cases across this country where this has happened. It's the first time I've seen it in the papers. But, you know, police will say that the kids are working on their own because that's all that they've heard from the kids. But my experience is there's a lot more to this story, and I don't know if it'll ever come out. On the prostitution laws, my personal opinion, I'm speaking from a personal opinion, and this is something that I think is very, very strong and something that I'm lobbying for in my own government, and we should never legalize prostitution. It's very, very scary. In other countries, so many bad things have happened. When they legalized prostitution, they found out in other countries like Sweden, for instance, where all of a sudden new girls showed up on the street from other countries. All of a sudden there was an increase in child abuse. All of a sudden the young prostitutes on the streets were very, very young, underage. And so Sweden and Norway and some of them changed their minds and reversed their decisions. And for our country even to examine or even consider something like that, I think is very alarming. So personally, I'm extremely against it. And will do everything in my power to ensure that that doesn't happen in our country, because I think we have to protect our young citizens. And it's everybody's right to be protected. It's everybody's right. We're the true north, strong and free. This is what why immigrants want to come to our country, and we need to protect our most vulnerable citizens, and certainly that is part of those vulnerable citizens certainly are our youth. And putting a law forward like that, it's just a free-for-all on young people, and so it's legal to abuse and rape and put very bad things in the lives of our young people. I've seen too much of it in human trafficking with the victims. I've worked in human trafficking, and personally speaking, absolutely not. It should never be legalized in our country.
Is there time for another question?
Sure,
Okay.
go ahead.
You were mentioning people in the schools that target, are these other students, or?
It's been my experience, and I've had many of these, is that a girl will become a girlfriend to a guy outside the school. It usually happens with a guy outside the school or a group of guys. And then they're coached on how they, you know, can get the girls. And so what they do is they look for the most vulnerable in the population. They look for a kid who maybe wants some friends, or who is a little left out, or maybe insecure, or maybe they just want to be part of a party group or whatever. And so they become friends, and that's how it all starts. It doesn't start with fear. It starts with inclusion, like they're part of the group. But it quickly changes, because then they're forced to do things they don't want to do. They're embarrassed about it. They don't want their parents to know. But this, I can tell you from my experience, this is not an isolated case. And it's all over the country. And I am not convinced at all that the girls worked on their own. If they did, it's the first one I've ever seen. I've been working with victims for over 10 years. So, no, I think there's more to the story. But I do think what a lot of people don't realize is that the perpetrators coach their victims. They threaten their victims. They'll coerce their victims. Don't talk. You're underage. You won't get much against you, you know.